Okay, welcome back. In this part 2 video of the array modifier animation in Blender 3D, we're going to go ahead and do the basics of keyframe animation. So check out part 1 if you need to do the setup. That's all the technical stuff. So now it's just about keyframing animation and the basics. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and do one tiny little step to make my workspace and screen a little bit cleaner. So I'm going to press N on my keyboard to make this toolbar pop up on the right hand side, and that gives us access to the location settings, the rotation settings, and the scale settings of our objects, which is really important with animation. I'm going to get rid of this toolbar on the left hand side by pressing T, and that just gives me a cleaner workspace and hopefully easier for you guys to see. Okay, I'm going to resize my window over here on the right, on Windows. Okay, so probably the most important thing is on the right hand side. Up here in the top right hand corner, you want to have access to your outliner window that gives you the overall list of everything in your scene. And you can see right here that I have empty 1 and empty 2. And I'm going to be basically flipping between those two, selecting those so that I can go ahead and then animate. So I'm going to make sure I'm on empty 1, and they're right on top of each other, so you really can't see much of a difference between the two. You will see down here in the bottom left-hand corner of my 3D viewport, whatever object I have selected, it will show it down there. Okay, I've got my timeline, I've got my dope sheet, so I can edit keyframes, and here we go. So I'm going to zoom out quite a bit so I can really kind of get a better view. Okay, so the basics for animation are you're going to select your object that you want to work with. You're going to set your timeline down here on whatever frame you want. I'm on frame 1. You're going to then make a change or not make a change to your object. And then the last step is you're going to press I and you're going to insert a keyframe on that object so Blender records the information, whether there's a change or not. Okay, so here we go. So I want to start off with everything just like this. The cube at the center, all the empties just like this at the center. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select both objects. I'm going to select both empties. So I'm going to shift right click and select both. And it doesn't look like I have it selected over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press B, and I'm going to do what's called a box select, and I'm going to left click and drag a selection around both objects here. And I believe I've got them. So I'm going to now press I to insert a keyframe, and I'm going to basically be choosing lock rot scale. So that will record location and rotation and scale information for both. So now the dope sheet comes alive. So what I'm going to do in the dope sheet to make things a little cleaner is right here where it says empty 1 and empty 2, I'm going to click on those little triangles to collapse those. And you'll see that it basically recorded the information for both objects, empty 1 and empty 2. And that's because I did select both of them with the box select tool. So I'm going to be using that quite a bit, where I press B, I left click and drag a selection box around the edge of the empties. And that did select both, and it keyframed them. So they both are recorded at frame 1 as staying in this position. Okay. I'm also going to be pressing A quite a bit to deselect all. Remember that A once will select everything. A second time will deselect everything. Okay, so now I'm going to come over here to the top right, make sure I have empty 1 selected. You can also come down here into the dope sheet. So that might just be a little faster for you to select your object. So I'm going to select empty 1, and I'm just going to be choosing some random arbitrary frame numbers. So I'm going to go to frame 60, and on frame 60 I'm going to take empty 1 and I'm going to grab it and move it on the x-axis. So I'm going to do G for grab, X for the x-axis, and I'm going to go ahead and move it out on the positive x-axis. I'm going to have it go kind of far out like that, and I'm going to keyframe this. So I'm going to select empty 1, and I'm going to shift right click and select empty 2. So even though empty 2 is not making any changes here, I still want empty 2 to hold this position. So now I'll press I, and I'll insert lock rod scale. Okay. Now you'll notice down in the dope sheet here, you'll see that empty 1 has these 2 keyframes, so it's recorded that change. But you'll notice that empty 2 has this bar going through it, and what that is that's Blender telling you that there is no change between keyframe 1 and keyframe 2. Alright, and if I go ahead and scrub the animation back, you'll see the animation happening, and there's the change there. Okay, so now I'll go ahead and maybe I'll go another 60 frames ahead, and I'll go to frame 120. Actually, I'll go ahead and I'll do a little bit shorter here. Let's go to maybe frame 90. Okay, so now on frame 90, I'm going to go ahead and bring empty 1, and I'm going to go ahead and bring it back on the x-axis so it kind of bounces back, something like that. And again, I'm going to shift right click and select both empties, insert a keyframe on lock rod scale, and now I've got that. So now I've got this bouncing kind of animation here. So if I bring it back, press play, you'll see it goes out, bounces back in, and then holds. Okay, again, if you don't like any of the timing, you want to make something faster, slower, you're going to come down here to the dope sheet editor. You're going to make sure you press A while your mouse pointer is down here, and that deselects all of them. You press A again, and that will select them all. So I'm going to press A to make sure nothing's selected, and now I can right mouse click on whatever keyframe I want, and when it's lit up and selected, I can now press G to grab it and move it and change it down there and do whatever I want. I'm going to Control Z to undo that. Okay, so that's pretty much the basics. Now you can go ahead and have fun with rotation and scale as well and do some pretty interesting stuff. So just a couple other little changes here. I'm going to go to frame 120, and now I'm going to start animating empty number 2 just so you can see the full effect here. So on frame 120, I'm going to select empty 2, and I'm going to go ahead and move it on the y-axis. So I'm going to go ahead and do G, Y, and when I do that, now you see the full effect of why we set up 2 empties and 2 array modifiers. So I'm going to have it come out right about here. Okay, so with that change, you always want to be able to see both empties. Okay, so now I need to select both empties and record that information. So shift right mouse click, select both empties, press I, lock rod scale. Okay, and it becomes very patternistic. It becomes very repeatable. So again, the basic steps are make a change in your timeline, make a change to empty 1 or empty 2 or both, then select both empties, and then press I and record the change. And those are the basic steps, and once you start doing it multiple times, it does become easier. Okay, so now I'm going to go to, maybe I'll skip down to frame 160. There we go. And now if I select, let's say if I select empty 2, and I want to rotate it now, so if I press R, and maybe I'll rotate it, I'll try it on the Y-axis. So if I rotate it on the Y, you'll see I start getting this really kind of very cool stuff here. What I like to do as an animator with this effect is I like to go ahead and try it out and see if I like the visual. I'm going to go ahead and zoom out just so you guys can see better. So if I do R, Y, I can see the effect, and you can see it's doing this pretty cool thing. If I don't like the visual and I go, nah, that's not really what I wanted, I'll just press Escape. So maybe I want to try R and Z and rotate it on the Z, and that's going to give me this. RX is going to give me this, kind of a rip curl effect. So that's rotation with empty number 2. Well, what about if I do it on empty 1? So again, I can rotate this here, try the x-axis, that gives us this really weird kind of wave, that's kind of cool. Maybe I'll try it on the Z, that gives me this, which is pretty Awesome. Okay, so that's rotation on both axes. So you sort of just have to try it out and let your brain and your eyes kind of figure it out. I haven't animated any scale yet. So if I do S, I can go ahead and scale, just do a general scale. That's just scaling up. But I can go ahead and scale on the X-axis, and that's going to give me this kind of effect. Or scale on the Y, it's going to give me this, which looks like an equalizer, which is pretty cool. And of course Z, which is going to give me again a equalizer kind of effect, but on the Z-axis. So I think I'm going to go ahead and try that. So I'm going to go ahead and scale up on the Z-axis, nothing too crazy. Again, now that I've made the change, I'm going to select both empties, I to record Lockrod scale, and there we go. Come down here to dope sheet, just kind of drag through the dope sheet, and you can see it goes out, comes back in, creates more, and then it's going to go ahead and scale up and do that. So that's pretty much it. Again, try experimenting by selecting both empties and try grabbing, rotating, and scaling on all three axes. It's going to feel pretty random until you start getting a feel for what each empty object is going to do. If you do make a keyframe and you don't like that keyframe, come down to the dope sheet editor. Remember to press A to deselect all. Find the keyframe that you want to edit or delete. You can left click and move your playhead around. If you want to delete something, just right mouse click, make sure it's highlighted, and press X, and you can go ahead and delete that keyframe that you have selected. Okay, so in the third video, I will set up the camera for animation. The cool thing about this is that if you go ahead and you play your animation, you can orbit your view with your mouse and pan around and zoom in and kind of play director and kind of see where the cool angles are and kind of get a feel for the animation and where you'd want to set it up. Okay, that's pretty much it. The last little tip I can give is down here at the bottom of the timeline. The default end frame is 250, but once you get rolling with this, you're going to want more time. So if you click down here and you type in 1,000 and press return, you now have 1,000 frames. So you can zoom out with your scroll wheel and your timeline, and you can basically see all 1,000 frames. And same thing here with the dope sheet editor. You can zoom out and see all 1,000 frames, and you can basically make your animation as long as you want. Just go ahead and make sure you do file save every once in a while, and you're golden. Okay, well, good luck, and I will see you in part 3.